Welcome back to episode 4 of the Cloud Hacking series. This episode is completely dedicated to AWS. So all we're going to do this episode is take a look at AWS, solve some labs that are hosted on an AWS infrastructure, and just specifically dedicate this whole entire episode to Amazon AWS. Let's roll it. Hey Carlos, thanks again for meeting me. I know in the last couple of episodes, the theme so far has been Web 2 and Web 3 infrastructures don't have a lot of differences. You still rely on Web 2. And I figured this episode we'll come back and talk about Amazon exactly, in specific, what Amazon is like. So before we jump into it, can you tell me kind of like, is it common to see a lot of your customers or these projects to be on Amazon? Is it common you still see that?
Yeah, so most of the clients that Halborn has are using actually AWS, and it's fun because most of the services they use are always going to be very, very similar.
Yeah.
Potentially one of the most common ones is Amazon S3. S3 means simple storage service, but this service stopped being simple years ago.
I mean, everything in Amazon seems to not be simple anymore.
Exactly. Well, here is the place where you will be storing some files, some documents you need, some logs even.
It's like an FTP server, but it's supposed to be simpler, even though it's not that simple.
Yeah, I suppose that was the goal, just to have some place to store these documents. But then Amazon has like 2 or 3 other services to store documents in case you want to access them faster or slower or more data or less data. It stopped being simple, man.
When it comes down to just AWS, you mentioned S3. What are some of the other functionalities? Before we talk about the functionality, what are some like the core things? Because I know like IAM is a big deal with AWS, right? IAM is how you manage all your roles and how the applications work and what they have access to. Before we do that, is that an accurate way of explaining IAM? Can you explain how IAM works and maybe what are some common mistakes you see with IAM roles?
Yeah, so IAM is potentially my favorite service in AWS. This is because it is impossible to use AWS without using IAM. This is the service, it means Identity Access Management, which means that you are going to be, creating users, creating roles, groups, and assigning permissions via policies to these principles. The thing is that it's impossible to do anything in AWS if you specifically doesn't have the required permission. The thing is that when someone starts using AWS, the idea is, this must be super simple. Like, I just want to spin up a machine. I just want to store some things. I just want to run this script in a Lambda function. So most of the people start using AWS without even learning about AWS. Yeah. So they are going to be giving overprivilege to these principles. And once things work, usually they are not touched anymore. So the most common misconfiguration you will find in some AWS account is going to be overprivileged users. And it doesn't always have to be the case that the person didn't know what he was doing, but it could also be the case that maybe they gave this privilege to a user that needed it, but that companies grow, companies change, maybe people doesn't even work in the same account, but the privilege remain in there. So I think that the most common misconfiguration you're going to find in an AWS is going to be that overprivileged principles. Also makes it funny because the most common vulnerability to entry in an AWS account is to find credentials.
Right.
So if you combine both of them, you're going to have an overprivileged leak of credentials.
To people that watched last week's episode, we pulled an IAM credential in one of the videos. And I think with what you were saying, when you go to set up your role, they give you so many options that it's so confusing that I can see someone just going, I want to have access to so many things, especially if they're new. There's just so many options, I feel like, when it comes to setting up and signing up a new user.
Yeah, moreover, when you want to give these permissions to a role or to a user, AWS has already predefined a set of permissions to do something with a name such as, EC2 instance to run other instances or something like that. And oftentimes, these roles predefined by AWS are going to be overprivileged themselves. Yeah. So that also doesn't help.
So instead of assigning it to a specific machine, instead of assigning it to an EC2, you're assigning it to all the EC2 instances. Yeah, that could be a very bad thing to do. I mean, we'll talk about this a little bit. Now that we kind of understand IAM, and then with IAM, when you go, there are different services, right? You can click what service you want to have access to. What are some of the common services that you see being used by maybe your customers? From a hacker's perspective, I see a lot of Lambda being used. S3 is a huge one, whether it's for static sites or storage or like uploading files. I know people use some databases on there. IAM is a big one itself. I know they can do integration with GitHub and that kind of stuff that we talked about in the last episode too, but what are some other ones that you have seen that could be commonly used in AWS?
So definitely EC2 instance is something that everybody is using. And also you usually find either ECS for containers or AKS for Kubernetes. Those are other very two typical services. Another service that I like a lot when people need to create these applications to allow people to log in, to have some user management, they usually will be using this Cognito, which is amazing because for some reason AWS decided, I guess in order to give more power and versatility to the developers, to give IAM permissions to authenticated and unauthenticated users in Cognito applications. Wow. So people could be able to even access your account with Cognito credentials. I can understand the reasons. I don't think I will share them from a security point of view. And actually one of the demos we are going to be showing is about that, about how to get IAM credentials using Cognito applications.
Nice. Very cool. You mentioned EKS. I know there was recent research done on EKS. I think Lightspin did a cool write-up on owning some EKS stuff. We're not going to look at that, but you said we have Cognito as a demo. What's the other demo? Is another one?
Yeah, we are going to be taking a look to some S3 Privilege Escalation. Some very common thing, at least in the past, I think in the bug bounty world, was to find a lot of widely open buckets. So today we are going to be seeing not only a widely open bucket, but we are also going to be exploiting some bad ACLs configurations in order to pre-besc inside the same bucket.
Yeah, for people that are watching and they're not familiar, the whole idea was you would find buckets, the storage buckets, where you could either just read all the files on there and people would have like their source code on there, they could have backups on there, it could be just your user data, or you can actually write to them, which was crazy because you can override files, you can host JavaScript files, HTML files, stuff like that. I don't think that's as common. From what I understand, all these like cloud providers, I don't want to give like bug bounties the credit for it, but there was so much research that came out of the bug bounty community that I feel like it forced a lot of these cloud providers to put things in place so it stops like that. S3 has a huge warning now that says, are you sure you want to make this public? And for some reason people still make them public. But yeah, if you're watching this, don't freak out. These are things that you as an organization should put in place. It's not on Amazon or AWS themselves to do it, but they do have things in place that kind of stops you from, by default, giving access to read your bucket and that kind of stuff. So let's just jump into a demo and kind of see what it looks like.
Yep.
And then we can just also tell us how we can prevesc and move around a little bit from the S3 bucket.
Sounds good. So let me explain you first the setup I create in order to make the bucket publicly accessible. So first of all, I generated this bucket with a very complex name, so nobody was going to find it, so I could prepare the demo without people being actually exploiting this. I made it publicly accessible, as you said. AWS make very, very sure people know when a bucket is publicly accessible.
In red, giant red says publicly accessible,
Yeah, so you don't confuse. Also, I have to say that nowadays it's even complicated to make it public accessible. Like you need to stop blocking, which is by default, all these options to make it accessible. I have also this bucket policy. So there are these services in AWS that not only supports IAM permissions, but also supports ACLs, which means that inside each service, each resource of the service, you can identify a new policy to give permissions to other principals to access it. Okay. So in this case, I have this ACL of S3 well, in this case, to allow everyone to put a bucket ACL. Like this is the permissions we are going to be explaining.
Got it. Okay.
Okay. So what else do we have here? Well, the ACL, I am allowing it, and everyone can read the bucket ACL. So at this point in time, we know that an unauthenticated privilege is not going to be able to read the bucket, but is going to be able to read the ACL and to put an ACL. So he's going to be able to escalate privilege in order to read the bucket, which is what we are going to be doing, but also he will be able to write on it.
Okay.
And nothing else interesting here, so let's go and check the demo. So I have prepared here some command lines. So first of all, the first thing we are going to be seeing is, well, this no sign request basically means don't use any kind of credentials that this computer might have set up. So we are going to be accessing like an unauthenticated users.
So the credentials that we imported in the last episode is going to be ignored by just putting no sign request.
Yeah.
And for people that are watching, the S3 ls S3 / is just how the AWS CLI works. You're telling it what service you want, what do you want to perform, like, you know, what do you want to execute, which is the listing of it. You can do things like copy, move, and that kind of stuff, and you're saying the function again or the service again, and then that giant thing is the bucket in that you put in the
Exactly.
earlier screen. Okay.
So now we are going to be taking a look to the ACL because we said that we put a policy to allow to read the ACL. So again, we are using the no sign request, and we can take a look that all users, this means anyone, can, well, in this case, read the ACL. I don't know why this put ACP instead of ACL, to be honest. And also, well, this is part of the account, so it's actually nothing that is taking place because we aren't any user inside the account.
And you can do this on any S3 bucket to see their ACL if that's enabled, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
If they have a policy allowing this, you can take a look. Actually, I think this is something people usually don't look at. It's very weird, very unexpected, but I haven't really seen people trying to previous inside a bucket. Like as you said, you might try to read, you might try to write, but I haven't seen people trying to read the policies in order to see if they can previous.
And this is something super easy to also automate. You just have to look for that keyword, right? You just got to look for all users in the URI.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
So now the fun part comes. So this is the policy we are going to be implementing. Actually, this is the policy. This start is just the same thing we have here. So nothing new there. But in the grantee, now instead of allowing to read the ACL, we are just going to be full control to all users. So we are going to be able to do anything. So let me create a file with this content. I use Nano, I don't know what you use.
Leave us a comment, tell us how we should be using Vim instead of Nano. Drop us a comment, let us know. Okay, so now you've created that file. So you call it in your privis.yaml, and then it's in your temp folder.
Yeah.
So what you're doing here is you're doing the same thing, but you're using the put bucket operation, and you're doing the access control policy and just feeding it where that is, right?
Yeah. Yeah, this is terribly, terribly important. If you want to indicate in AWS CLI a file, you need 3 slashes, not 2.
Yeah.
But a lot of people confuse, and it's always a headache.
Yeah, it's protocol and then the full path,
Yeah.
starting with the root folder. Yeah.
So, okay. We have now overridden it. We don't have any kind of output, so I'm going to suppose that it worked.
So if it works, we run that command again,
Yeah.
where it says the list, and it should change it to the new one. So at the top we have that, and now we can see it added full control. Nice,
Yeah,
okay.
it changed it definitely. So now we are going to do the first command here, because
The first one failed when we did ls.
yeah, this
So
shouldn't be
in theory
failing
now
anymore.
should work.
And now we have, can you see me?
Wow,
This
nice,
was the
okay.
file we were meant to see.
How common is this? Have you seen this in a lot of your pen tests?
So fortunately, ACLs and policies is something that most of the client doesn't even know about. So that prevents them from putting this kind of misconfiguration, but I have seen a few of them in a while.
Wow.
Well, it's always interesting because it's a previous inside a service. Like people think in the AWS you can only previous via AMs, but
Yeah.
actually there are a lot of misconfigurations that could be abused.
So this is pretty much like you have to manually check for these different access controls, right? So I think it's people that are watching this, if you're new, good place to learn and like play around with. If you're already doing like pen testing, it's really easy to automate this. I feel like you can just feed that command into JQ and grep for URI, and if it's all users, then you have something, you have a lead pretty much.
Yeah, exactly. So it's
Okay.
pretty easy to use.
Cool. You mentioned Cognito.
Yeah.
What is Cognito at a high level? What is it used for, and what are we looking at today for it?
So Cognito at a high level, it's way to give developers inside AWS a very, very, very easy way to maintain, let's call it user database. So you can allow your users to create their own user in your platform, store them in the Cognito user pool, and then allow them to log in.
Yeah.
The thing is that it is possible, well, Cognito is separated into different pools, is the identity pool and the user pool. The thing is that the identity pool is going to allow you to give IAM permissions to unauthenticated users just because they know this ID that is publicly available. So anyone with that ID is going to be able to get credentials for that role.
Okay.
And then we have, and in the user pool is where you can allow people to generate their own users, to log in later, and then after login, it's also possible in Cognito to configure a different role, so users, authenticated users will be able to get this role. I understand that the goal of this was, imagine that you want to store some information about the user, maybe some settings, maybe some, I don't know, user pick profiles.
Yeah.
You could just create this S3 folder and each user could be able to write into it and generate its picture for their avatar. And this is a very, very easy way to get credentials, check if it has permissions, if he has permissions to store the picture and store it in S3. That makes everything easier to instead of generating other databases or creating other ways to check permissions, just using IAM permissions. The problem is that, as we have said before, IAM roles are usually overprivileged. So a lot of people might misconfigure this, and instead of giving permission to write only his picture, it might give permission to write any kind of data inside the S3 bucket, or even just giving administrator privilege.
So Cognito pretty much sits between AWS and the user for an authorization mechanism.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know I've seen a talk on something similar to this somewhere. I'm gonna think of what it was, but okay, let's look at the demo. What is the demo? What are we supposed to do with this demo that we're taking a look at?
So in this demo, I created a couple a user pool and an identity pool. And what we are going to be doing is obtain credentials for unauthenticated Cognito users and then for authenticated Cognito users. And we are not going to be solving the NAHANCOM EU 2022 CTF called incognito mode, but we are going to be solving maybe the main part of that.
Okay.
This challenge also have this path traversal vulnerability in order to exfiltrate other configuration. We are not going to take a look to that, but we are going to be basing this demo in that.
So we'll exploit the authentication part.
Yeah.
Instead of doing the whole thing. Okay, let's take a look.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're looking at a typical login page.
Yeah, so in NAHANCOM you could see this get incognito config login page where you were expecting, well, to log in. Maybe people will start doing something like admin. Obviously, this shouldn't be working. No, incorrect username and password. The thing is that in this kind of CTF, usually you will expect a register here or something to do, or a vulnerability in the login, some SQL injection, SSRF, something to do. The fun part, if we take a look to the source code, is that you are actually going to be looking at a very weird JavaScript, and I see weird because people playing CTF is not used to be using Cognito. So the fun part of this in this script is that you're going to be seeing, well, user password, some weird client ID that looks like this kind of secrets. This is weird, and then, well, you're going to be getting the username, the password, and then you're going to be taking a look to this Lambda configuration. This is where the path traversal vulnerability will live in. We are not going to be exploiting this, but yeah, that's a good point. We are not going to be exploring this, but after you manage to get valid credentials, you could get a path traversal here. So just knowing this client ID, if the developer register some IAM role to this to this Cognito identity pool, it is going to be possible to get some IAM credentials, and that's what we are going to be doing.
Okay.
So if we go to the terminal and we also take a look to this Cognito demo, well, first of all, we need to go to 10 minutes mail and create a new email. Let me come here. No, this wasn't the page here. 10 min mail. Okay, we have our mail. Now we are going to be using this long command line.
So what we're doing here, we are using AWS CLI again, and you're going to use the Cognito service. You're going to give it the sign up function. The client ID was in the source code.
Yeah.
And the username you're going to give it is superadmin12345 with the password. And what you're doing here is you're registering that user. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
And then you're using the 10-minute email. We just created this to have a temporary email address, and you're just going to sign up and get emails there.
So yeah.
So just because there's a sign up on a page doesn't mean you can't sign up. You just got, if they're using Cognito, then you can do this operation and see if you can register a new account.
It's a little bit more complicated. There are obviously ways to prevent people from creating their own account.
Yeah.
And you can configure that. Also, there are different ways to create an account, so this might haven't worked. At another point, you may need to know another secret. But there are, in different Cognito configurations, you could be able to just create an account, just using a valid email, a password, and then the username. It's also important to know that I changed the username at the beginning because you will need to be using a unique one.
Yeah.
But in this case, well, just any username will do the trick.
Okay.
The fun part is that developers might think they are secure because, you know, after you create your account, you need to verify it. But obviously, the code to verify it is going to your email. So we should receive here an email with the verification code, and now we are going to be verifying our account to username and confirmation code.
So same thing, AWS CLI using the same operation or same service. We're just doing the confirm sign up operation, and we just got to give it we got to pass it the code that we got in our email.
Let me check it.
Let me say it one more time. We got to pass it the code, okay?
And the username and the client ID, obviously. And with this, we should be able to verify it. And now this is going to be a valid username. So, for example, if superadmin1234, if we go back to the page, we do superadmin, press this should be working. And now we will be getting this, and we could be, well, this is not relevant for our demo, but it worked. We managed to register a user.
Is it common for developers to leak that client ID for?
Yeah.
So usually in a JavaScript file or in this, DOM of the, HTML, you can always see it.
Yeah, this is public information. So there is no way you can hide this if you want to be doing authentication inside the client side.
So if somebody comes across a web page when there's a client ID and they're using AWS, would the first step to be trying and seeing if you can use Cognito to register a new account and look at the permissions?
I will definitely do that, and actually it's very easy to recognize because you need to import a very specific library in order for all of this to work. So if you take a look and you find the AWS SDK, it's highly probable that it's using this.
So all the people that are into recon, all they have to do is write a nuclei template that matches that JavaScript file.
Actually, that's true.
Nice.
Actually, that's true.
Is there more to the demo?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
We are just getting started.
Oh, okay. Okay, so now that we're logged in, what's next?
Yeah. So yeah, we are just getting started, and this was the first part of the demo. We managed to register this account, as we commented. It's not always going to be possible by default. There are different settings that you can use to prevent this. The next step of this demo is to manage to get an IAM role from knowing the identity pool ID. In this case, the identity pool is this one. this is not part of the code we just saw before, but it's something that you can easily find in the wild. Actually, this was this very, I learned this part in a Black Hat London, it's possible, talk, where this guy basically managed to find thousands of these IDs and just try to get all the credentials. And on each credentials, he tried to access EC2 instance, S3 buckets, and then prepare this kind of graph showing how many hundreds of accounts he managed to compromise just because of this.
So for this one specifically to work, you have to have this ID.
Yeah.
You have to get it to leak somewhere, or maybe you find an application in the logs that's leaked out. So this is not something you can easily find, though.
It's something you cannot easily find, but actually this guy found thousands of those.
Yeah.
So
it's an arbitrary thing. If you find it, then you can try this attack with, but it's not like the client ID when it's leaked on purpose. Got it, okay.
Yeah, exactly. So this is going to be pretty easy, just a couple of commands, and you can check if we have enough permissions. Let me identify maybe a region. Yes, used one. So we have the identity ID. This is something that we need to use to just get credentials for the identities, like it just generated some identity for us.
In fact, this is a really good thing that people that get on a pen test, it's more feasible to see this than on a bug bounty program. Because with a, with a pen test, you can get access to these kinds of things, but with a bug bounty program, it's a lot harder. I'm just comparing that, with how bug bounty hunters would look at these things. Okay, wow, and that gives you just credentials.
We just have the token here. So if I set them up, flow CTF, let's call this Cognito 1.
Similar to what we did last week, this is pretty much you just pull credentials from it. And all you have to do is just authorize yourself, authenticate yourself into it and see what you have access to, right?
Basically.
A good way to look for this is people leak these in GitHub and GitLab and gist files and stuff
mobile
like that.
applications. This is very common to find in mobile applications.
Or even like
also.
Jenkins has a lot of I don't know if that's a common way, not Jenkins, sorry. I feel like also with debug code, sometimes they leak a lot of information. So you just have to find a way to find this. And as we're just looking, I'm like, how would I look for this for, for Uber, for example, in a bug bounty program? I feel like I have to dumpster dive through all their GitHub repositories and write a regex that looks for this exactly.
Actually, we should do that after this.
Okay, cool. So that's it. We just get access to this, and now we can pretty much either manually look for all the services it has access to, or you run something like a Scout 2 or whatever third-party tool you want, and then you just have it spit out what you have access to, and hopefully if you're on a pen test, you have access to backups or something good, right?
Yeah, we are not going to be doing that part, but at this point, the red teaming exercise will start.
Cool, that's awesome. Is there more to this?
Yeah, just a little bit more.
Okay,
so,
but wait, there's more.
Just a little bit more, yeah. So previously, we created this user, and as I told you, there is a way to assign other IAM roles to generated users. So we are just going to be we are going to follow the same step, but with generated users.
Okay.
So in this case,
1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah. We need to indicate the authentication flow, the client ID. This is the same one as previously. Password. So we get here a token to identify our identity. The ID token is what we are going to be using. This is again the ID. This is the user pool ID. It's not going to be the same one as the one we used previously for getting unauthenticated access. Again, you will need to take a look for this information.
Yeah.
But when we have it, also another ID you will need is this one, which is more weird to find.
Why do we want to get this ID token in the request that you showed earlier? When we get this ID token, why is that so important? I'm pretty much what I'm asking is, why did you have to run this authenticate using CLI?
So the first step is to authenticate to the user pool. For that, you need to know the username and password. You need to have registered your own user, and you need to identify the authentication flow. So this is going to be giving you the ID we just saw previously. So this is what the user will be using to contact the web application to say, hey, This is me. This is my user. Like this is the
Got it,
the
okay.
JWT token it will be using for that.
So that's your authorization headers that you need that for. Okay.
Exactly.
Got it, okay.
And then using that, you could manage to get some IAM roles credentials. In this case, you are going to be needing the identity pool ID for the user pool, and then you need also the user pool ID, which is this part here. That is something more weird to find in the wild, but I guess something that you could also take a look for.
Yeah, I mean, if they leak this information, it's going to be together, right?
Yeah,
if it gets leaked, it's going to be in documentation. So if you're a developer watching this, don't leak these things on GitHub. So we're going to first get the identity ID with our token that we had, right?
Yeah, so we are going to be getting the token.
Yeah, we show how to do the token. The demo gods weren't with us, but we're making it work. Okay. So we run this command. We got to do the region.
Oh man, stupid region. Region US.
And then what this is going to do is using the Cognito identity, it's going to give us the identity ID that we need for our next command. So we copy that into our next command right here. We have to put that. We have to identify that we need this bit for this to work, but we're using the same exact authentication or authorization code in the last step, but we're just switching the identity ID, right?
Yeah.
So those are practically the same. You're just getting the ID that you want and then switching it.
Yeah, this is because for Cognito you always need to have this identity
Yeah.
ID, just like in the unauthenticated demo. So doing that, we managed to get the
same
credentials.
thing as last step, you just use those credentials to log in.
Should we use them to show it works?
Yeah, we should.
Real fast. I also want to show that these are different roles, or I think they should be different roles. So let me copy paste.
So people are watching and you can have different profiles. So we're just doing another one. Our last ones that we got are up there. So this is how people could pretty much prevent themselves, right? You can go from one set of key, use those keys to get another ID, and then from that ID you can get the next set of keys, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
So now we do AWS profile, Cognito 2, SDS, get caller, identity,
It looks like we're logged in.
Cognito identity credentials. And I guess that will depend if I have added two
token,
different
yeah.
roles or one.
I mean, those tokens could have expired. Oh no, it hasn't expired. Nice. So it shows that you have pool auth role, and then this one has unauth role.
Yeah. So we will manage in this case to get two different IAM roles to get into the account. So you will have two different entry points to exploit AWS. And the fun part is that both credentials were actually public.
Yeah. How common is this? Have you seen this in any of your pen tests that you have done?
In most of the ones that they are using Cognito, yeah, it's common.
Nice. Okay. Is there any more to the demo?
No.
Cool. So if you're watching this, these are the first one that we talked about. The S3 bucket is very common. I've seen it a lot happening with like just readable S3s, but I've never thought about their profiles. And Cognito is a really big new thing for me. So I'm going to try and look at these, and I'll definitely let you know if they work in any other bug bounty stuff that I do. Cool. If you're watching this, you want to learn more, come back next week. We're going to look at GCP. I feel like GCP and AWS are kind of similar, but also very different in a lot of ways. Hacking is very similar, I kind of feel like. Some of the stuff is very similar, but the infrastructure itself is different, right? So we'll take a look at that next week. Cool. That was all of it. That's it. There's one more episode for now that's coming out next week. That's going to be focused on GCP or Google Cloud Platform. And we're going to take a look at different ways you can hack into a GCP account, some common vulnerabilities, and just completely dedicated to GCP and learn from Carlos on how to do these things. So for now, I will see you all next week.